All right, we're live. Hey everyone, welcome to Comic Book Artist Secrets. No, wait, I got the name of my own station wrong, my own channel wrong. Comic Artist Pro Secrets. I think I say that name every single day, so I must be nervous about the big, huge star that I've got lined up for you right now. This is an extraordinary man. Extraordinary man. I'll introduce you to him in a minute. First, I just wanted to say Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to everyone watching right now. I see you're all coming in. This is absolutely terrific. I want to thank everyone. My biggest Christmas gift from you all this year is just the success, strength, and rapid growth of this channel and this community. You know, I think I started this on a whim in October, and just because Comicstorian and channels like Comics Explained, I met those gentlemen, and they were kind enough to give me some encouragement about starting my own YouTube channel. Scott just went, if you saw him for a second ago, he just went to go turn on the channel. His whole family is in the next room, like on a TV. They're so excited about watching this live. He'll be back in 1 second. But I owe you guys everything. I'm so very, very grateful for all of your support and for the way this channel has grown, for the fact that you guys have, you know, promoted it and retweeted it and told your friends. Again, I mean, I can't thank you enough for the way this channel has inspired people to start drawing again, and people are showing me their work. That's my favorite thing. I absolutely love seeing people's artwork. So let's see here. All right, let me pull you guys up. Boom. There you are. All right. This is very exciting. I haven't done one of these in a little while, guys. I think it's been a few, might have been 2 weeks. I think I skipped a week of doing one of these live interviews. Yeah. So this is going to be pretty cool. Let's see who's all in the chat right now. Oh, good. Am I using that? No, okay, listen, here's the thing about the filter. My wife watches these, and she's like, that intense bright light from the light fixture over your head drives me crazy when the camera switches back and forth between people. We have a live chat already. Or a super chat. James Dietrich. Hey dude, you did a video drawing Venom and mentioned McFarlane as the creator and didn't mention Dave Michelini. Sorry, I'm an obsessive jerk. James, thanks for the super chat. You were absolutely right. I should credit Dave Michelini. Sorry, I'm a jerk who is concerned more about the artists than the writers when it comes to creating a character, especially a character like Venom, who is so visually striking. And so much of who that character is and his success is due to Todd McFarlane. Now, had another artist drawn David Michelini's idea, would that character be as popular as Venom is? That's the question. That is why I showed preference to the artists. Oh, this is great. You guys are streaming in. All right, you guys, we're vamping for a little bit. If you guys have questions, you can ask them now. I know I have not been live in like a long time. That's because I'm actually working on making videos, which I think are pretty good. I'm doing more drawing videos. When I talk to people about the channel, most of the feedback I hear is that they would like to do, or they would like to see more how to draw videos, less drama videos. Even though I've only done like 3 drama videos. Has there been too much drama on this channel? I don't know. Matt West, thank you for the super chat. Hey EVS, I still like your Barry drawing. Well, thank you. Wait, which Barry drawing? The Black Lantern Barry or the old how to draw a Flash thing that I did a little while back? But yeah, Hot Pink points out the video making takes a lot out of you, and it sure does. But it's worth it. I make myself laugh. Yeah, it says smart, funny, and lazy says DNC is drama, EVS is drawing. Yeah, but when drama occurs, what do you want me to do? Some people need to be called out. like that. And that's what this channel is for, to some degree, to some extent. All right, I think I hear our guy. All right, I'm so excited about this. This guy is a writer who has done so much. I mean, he has written your favorite character. I guarantee it. I mean, he's been around for a long time. We'll talk to him about how he got started in comics and everything. Listen, you only get the legends on this channel. I only bring you the biggest talent available. And this guy is he is one of them. He's a funny guy. He's a writer that has written comics with Jim Lee. He is a new screenwriter who has written a very, very successful and profitable horror film very recently. I think it's still out in the theaters. We'll talk to him about that too. But most of all, he's a fun-loving, happy prankster, a funny guy, and a really, really, really good soul. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Scott LOBDELL.
I hope you're not overselling me.
I don't think it's possible to oversell you, Scott.
What did you call me? A prankster pranking?
I think you're like me. I think you have a little bit of a hoaxster soul. What do you think of that? What if I said that you've got that
Loki,
kind of like Loki? I wouldn't have been so grandiose. that may be where you and I differ. I mean, I see myself as a married prankster, and you see yourself as the god of pranks. But yeah, I mean, we're very
well, like
much.
I said, you're the one that oversold it, maybe. So that's my only concern. I don't want people to think they're going to be amused for the next hour or something.
No, we're very simpatico in that way. I think both of us really love mischief, and one thing about you is. You are always, I think you're a put on. I think a lot of what you do is a put on, and I really appreciate it. There are a lot of layers to the onion that is Scott LOBDELL.
Wow, that's interesting that you say that.
Why do you think? Do you agree or disagree?
Do I agree? I don't know. I mean, it's like, I do often say things that I think are funny and designed to push buttons, but I don't, you know, I'll just say this. Sometimes I say something that I think is funny, and I think it's the most ridiculous thing I can say, which is why it's funny, but it's delivered in a way that people will respond to it as if I'm being serious, and then they're like kind of taken aback. And, you know, and I think I've just said clearly I've said the most ridiculous thing I could say, and people react like, oh, what do I? And so I don't know that I necessarily do it on purpose as much as it's a way to go through life amusing myself sometimes. Do you
find playing a character sometimes?
What's that?
Do you think you're playing a character sometimes when you're talking to people?
I don't know that I don't know that would go that far. I mean, I don't think it's still that would kind of feel like it's maybe I do. Yeah. I would say that.
Yeah, I'm kind of.
There's like 10 people in the next room. I can ask them if they think they're seeing the real me.
I love that you've got your family over for Christmas time. I think that's wonderful. I think it's.
Oh, actually, I'm down here in Florida visiting my mother, and the room full of people are not, or they're sort of family, but they're more this amalgamation of talk about living legends that you were just referencing. Each one of them is a living legend in their own right.
Well, you might be
you hold on a second. You talk for a second. I'm going to go in the other room and ask them if they think I'm a character. Hold on one second.
Okay, go ahead. Let's get their feedback on that. And I think that would be useful because nobody would know you better than your family. And if they sell you out live on Comic Artist Pro Secrets, I think that would be worth the whole interview, frankly. What do you guys think? I mean, this is the thing about this guy. He is very, very, very funny. He's very amusing. Let's see what they say. I think his mom would know him, but I would like to hear his mother. You can hear him in the next room.
Yeah, apparently you're right. They they all agree that I'm a prankster and that they love me for it. So,
well, that's good. We love you for it too. Now, the thing about you is that,
well, actually, Ethan, it's kind of an interesting question. Do you, you've interviewed a bunch of people. Do
yeah.
you find that there is a, like, you know, with a Dan Slott or a Mark Wade or these other people that you interview, do you find that there's a I don't know, dichotomy between who they present themselves to be, or, you know, it's like, I'll say this, that you, it's, I feel a teeny bit defensive as if I'm not a genuine person, but that's not really what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you're a creative person, and creative people who are truly happy. I think we share this similarity. We go through life coming up with ideas for things that we can say and do that kind of make ourselves laugh in a way. And so much of what I do, and again, I mean, just talking to you and knowing you as I have, I mean, a lot of it's just fun. It's just a put on. And why be boring? And I will say I don't. I bring that up with you, and I wouldn't have said the same. I wouldn't ask the same question of Mark Wade or Dan Slott, for example, the two gentlemen that you brought up, because that's not who they are. Not at all. I don't think that they're interested in putting people on for the benefit of making themselves or others laugh. They're not
Well, you
Andy
know,
Kaufman.
this reminds me now. Remember, you and I have spoken many times on Gmail, but remember, I forget what convention we were at where we first met, and you were at the table, and I came up, and I was just like asking you this series of really stupid questions, and you were trying to be polite and trying to be polite, and then finally, you know, I said I was me, and we both started laughing because I'd gone out of my way to, you know.
I didn't know
Because
what
I
you
knew it was going to end with us laughing, so I could, you know. Do you remember that?
Yes,
What convention was that?
I do remember that. And since then, yeah, I mean, every time we're at a convention together, there's something silly like that. Let me ask you a question. You know, the one thing that everyone that I've interviewed so far has in common is we have had superheroes and comic books around us since a very young age. Like, I found Superman when I was 3 years old, and Superman is my hero. I mean, he's the superhero.
Did you say the X-Men?
No, Superman. Superman. I didn't know the X-Men until much later. I found the X-Men when I was 12 or 13, and I was the right age to find the X-Men. But Superman caught me as a little boy. You know, I had a Superman cape, and I saw the movie, and that colorful world of interesting superheroes and power fantasies like that really caught me at age 3, 4, 5, and the Super Friends cartoon and everything like that. Now, I think it happened differently for you. When did you? Well, first of all, like, were you watching the animated shows of the 60s and 70s as a kid?
Vaguely, I don't know if you remember, they had WPIX in New York. It was Channel 11, and that was the only. They would strip the, you know, Mighty Marvel Marching Society shows, but you know, as you know, as a kid, mostly the cartoons we got to see were Saturday morning, and they were split up between, you know, 3 major networks. So you know, either you'd settle in and watch, you know, Scooby and Land of Lost and whatever, or you'd, you know, seek out your particular hero. But that was pretty much the extent of my my exposure to comics and superheroes. And when I was one of these people who came to comic books very, very late in comic book life, when I was about 16 or 17, I'd been in the hospital a bunch of times for a collapsed lung. And for some reason, what's that?
How did that happen?
There were blisters on my lung, and the blisters would pop. It was just there was no, there's nothing that I did. It was just a matter of, I guess apparently I was born with blisters on my lung. And it's not they're called spontaneous pneumothoraxes. And spontaneous means sudden, and pneumothorax means, I think, air in the lungs or something. And it's fairly, I wouldn't say common, but it's, you know, when I was in the hospital, I met other people who had it. So, but when I was in the hospital, people would bring me comic books by the dozens. And I guess I was too young for Playboy and too old for, you know, highlights with Goofus and Gallant or something. So remember Goofus and Gallant? That's like you and I are Goofus and Gallant. You don't remember?
No, you know what? I don't.
Highlights magazine?
No, I don't know who that is. I don't know that reference at all.
I bet well, no, your viewers probably won't too. They're probably even younger. But if anybody remembers Goofus and Gallant, tell Ethan. But moving ahead a few years to where I started writing comic books, and I think it's kind of interesting, and maybe it's what we talked about earlier, but I am one of the guys in the business who really doesn't have any sacred cows, because I didn't grow up with them like, you know, like you did, or Mark Wade did, or, you know, Dan, who I think is really, really good at going back through every issue of Spider-Man ever and picking out particular moments to retell stories and stuff. Not retell, but you know, use them as the seeds for his own stories. You know, I think you can see it in my in a way, I think I was the perfect guy for the New 52, because I was brought in specifically to not do every other Superman story or every other Titan story or anything like that. I was, you know, I didn't have that, I don't think I've ever had it, and I kind of enjoy not having this thing that bonds me to, you know, the characters through my childhood. I mean, like, you're a Green Lantern guy, you love Green Lantern stuff. Were you, did you start out being a Green Lantern guy? Or?
No, I knew not. See, this is what I'm relating to what you're saying. I also have, I think I work better when I have no worshipful feelings about past creators or past storylines. I read 0 Green Lantern comics before I was given the job on Green Lantern Rebirth. And it's better that way. You just go, well, give me the gist. Tell me what the character's about, because I'm going to do a literal translation of what you're telling me. If you never read 70 years worth of Batman comics, but you just read Detective 27. Now, how interesting would that be? You just got the basics of the character down. What do you think? Do you think that would be a more interesting version of Batman than someone who has a deep love and respect and knowledge of, like, Neil Adams? And
well, you know, it's funny. It's so funny because, like, when I started Superman, I did a scene, you know, I did a few scenes with Lois where, you know, I showed her sense of humor, I showed her flirting with another guy, blah, blah, blah. And people lost their minds. They were like, you know, Lois Lane is this, and Lois Lane is that, and Lois Lane is, you know, the epitome of every woman who's ever had a job. And I was like, wow. So I went back and, like, you know, if you're going to be a fan of a character that's been around for 30, 40, 70 years, that's a long time to, you know, to try to make a coherent, you know, version of that character and try to pretend that you're using every aspect of the character that's ever been written, which you can't. I mean, you know, Lois, you know, married gorillas, and, you know, for, I don't know, 20 years, every issue was about her trying to get Superman to marry her, whether it was like, you know, tricking him. You know, she shows up with a big handlebar mustache and a hat, and she's like, you have to marry my daughter. And he's like, oh, no. And, you know, like, so, and if you want to be a fan of Lois Lane, then you have to, you know, take into account 70 years. If you're, you know, if you're saying, well, this is Lois Lane, this, you know, my feeling is that all these characters are characters that, you know, have grown, not only grown tremendously over the years, but have lent themselves to so many different types of stories and so many different versions of them. And so now, you and I are currently in this world where, like, let's look at John Byrne when he did Man of Steel, for example. When he did Man of Steel, his version of Clark Kent was that he hadn't become Superman until he moved to Metropolis, which meant there was no Superboy, which meant there's no Justice League of, Legion of Superheroes. So it's like, oh my God, there's no Legion of Superheroes. But, as a kid, we were reading that going, wow, that's so wild. And maybe you go to the comic book store and you go, oh, but now if a creator does anything that changes anything, that, Twitter explodes and Tumblr explodes, and, YouTube doesn't explode because YouTube is the coolest.
That's right. Well, that's what I've been telling you. YouTube is the best, and this YouTube community rules.
Yeah, and so it's but so all these things are have become so explosive, but through the years, creators come on and they do their versions of the characters, and I've done my version of the characters, which isn't necessarily everybody else's versions, and some people find that upsetting, and some people say, oh, here's a different different take on a character. So like Superman, for example, when I did Superman, one of the first things I did is Lois got a text from this guy she was about to move in with, and Clark hadn't known about it. And when she got the text, he looked through her and read the text. And people lost their mind saying, Clark would never, ever disrespect someone's privacy. And I'm thinking, well, you might not, and I might not, but I can't see through people, and I can't see through walls, and I can't, listen to conversations half a city away. And so if I'm being true to what I think a person who has all those abilities has, it's not necessarily the Clark Kent that had been been written for 75 years, as much as within the context of the story that I'm telling, this felt to me a perfectly reasonable way for Clark to, Clark Kent can hear somebody robbing a bank 30 blocks away, and he's like, oh, I gotta go, and he's off. But people don't go, well, he shouldn't be listening to bank alarms. How rude is that? He shouldn't be listening to people calling out for help. That's none of his business. So I think, I just think it's interesting. Like I say, getting back to what we're talking about, like, I don't think I have sacred cows when I start writing. And I think that makes my writing different, for better or for worse,
Right, and unique, and you're going to get Scott Liddell's voice when you buy Scott Liddell's books, and not necessarily some pale imitation of someone else. And I think that is an actual problem with a lot of creators. They come in desperately trying to emulate what came before that worked, instead of trying to find the heart of a character that they believe is the heart of the character, and working out from there. I'm glad to hear you say that kind of thing. Do you have I know that you at one point dabbled in psychology. I mean, at some point you were thinking about being a psychologist.
Yes, I did. I went to Dutchess Community College in Poughkeepsie, New York. It was a 2-year college, and I managed to get through it in 6 years, and I'm still 2 credits away from graduating. So
when are you going to do that?
That was about 30 years ago.
Do those credits still count?
Do those credits? I don't know. What's funny is there's my psychology professor at the time. His name was Carl Denty, and he was a great guy. And he's still a great guy. I mean, I haven't seen him in many years, but when I was doing X-Men, there was I created a character called the Executioner, and out of respect for my friend and mentor, I named him Carl Denty. And at the time he was honored, but he's since gone on to become the dean of the college. And this was, again, like this was probably 25 years ago. So he's the dean of the college. But what happens is anytime you Google him, there's 6 pages of the executioner, and on the 7th page there's a little picture of him, as the president of the dean of the college. So and he says, like, every year students will come and go, "Hey, did you?" He says, yeah, I know.
You made him famous. You made him comic book famous. I want to take you back again. I go through this slowly. I want these interviews to be linear, like that. Okay, so I want to go back to you, 17 years old, and I want to talk about, even though.
Do you edit these? Do you edit these, or you just?
No. This is going to be what people see for the rest of your life. I mean, this and beyond. Like, this video is going to be posted.
I would have combed my hair, Mom.
Yeah, this is going to be how most people remember you. And in fact, this artifact is going to survive, a nuclear attack or something like that. This will be people generations from now will say, "Who was Scott LOBDELL?" and they'll refer to this.
Yeah, and they'll find it and they'll be like, "My God, those were comic book writers were legends in 2017."
They'll say, "Why didn't they comb their hair, though?"
You watch, he's going to come in any minute and be like, "Hey, hold on a second."
Okay, listen. So you're 17 and you're in the hospital and you're getting comic books. Comic books meant nothing to you before.
Wait 1 second. Wait. I'm just curious. Do you really think that, they say like that every episode of I Love Lucy got broadcast into outer space?
Yeah.
And, like someday we'll see like aliens land and they're like, "Lucy, chicken up in the show." I just wonder if like some civilization in the future, like they won't know about Trump, they won't know about Obama, they won't know about Clinton. All they'll have is this video.
All they'll have is us.
Like, yeah, they'll have us. So I guess we really have to be careful what we say in the next.
No, I think we need to be ourselves, because if aliens are modeling their civilizations based on anybody, it should be us, right? All
right. Well, you should. Let me just say, speaking directly to the people that are watching this.
Yeah.
If you do have questions, make sure they're really good questions, because what you ask tonight could affect the future of mankind.
That is true. And other alien civilizations, they're all counting on the people in the chat right now, in the live chat, who are all saying that they adore you right now. I just want to let you know that.
They adore me right now.
Somebody is saying, "Oh, he breaks the fourth wall," and you do, and that's.
I hate the fourth wall.
Yeah, I mean, what is this? The wall? Is this the fourth wall?
I
think it is. All right, talk to me about the comics that you read when you were 17. That's what people want to know. They want to know the comics that were given to you, that you recall, that made an impact on you when you were sick in the hospital.
Well, my one of the comics I reread was King Size or Giant Size Daredevil #1 by Gene Colan, and I'm sorry to say I forget who the writer was, but in the old days you would read a comic and then you'd read it again and then you'd roll it up and you put it in your pocket and you'd go to the barber shop and you'd be waiting for your turn and you'd take out the comic book and you'd read it again, or you'd go to the supermarket and your mother would go into the store and you'd take it out and you'd read it again. But so this was way before comic book stores, so you got a comic book and you held on to it and you slept with it. And so I there's a comic book, that Giant Size X-Men King Size Daredevil #1. Sorry. What happened was my sister Jody and it was my birthday, and somebody said, "Oh, we have a present for you down at the neighbors." So Jody and I got on the bike, and she sat on the, I guess she sat on the back or the handlebars or something. No, she sat on the back, and I was driving. We got like 20 yards from the house. I lived on a hill. We got 20 yards from the house, and the bike started wobbling, and I went flying one way, and Jody went flying the other way. And it was a disaster. We were all scraped up. We should have been in the hospital, but you know, there are no parents there. So my brothers and sisters are like bringing us into, you know, taking us up into my parents' bedroom. We're just lying there in this heap. And Jody's face was all scraped up. And my arm was all scraped up. And she looks over and she goes, how come your arm is scraped up, but your face isn't scraped up? I said, because of king size Daredevil #1. There's a scene where he's about to be, he gets attacked and he's about to fall on the pavement and he says, must protect face, must protect face. And I said, so that's what I did. And she's like, why didn't you tell me to must protect face? So, so that was probably because of that comic book, I'm as handsome as I am today, because if I had not read it, I would be just, the whole side of my face.
Yeah.
I'd look like Harvey Dent.
Yeah, I'm really glad. Thank you, Gene Colan, wherever you are. Really appreciate that. I mean, these comics is.
Had you ever met Gene Colan?
Mm-mm.
It's so funny. Gene Colan talk like this. He was the most soft-spoken person I've ever met.
Wow. Well, what about Al Milgrom? Now, listen. Here's the thing. According to your Wikipedia, you actually wrote for the college newspaper and interviewed Al Milgrom. Why? What made you do that? What are you eating?
A grape.
Grapes are so good this time of year.
Especially in Florida. They're amazing.
Yeah, I talked about that. We'll get to Al Milgrom in a second. People watching right now, you should know, December is grape season. Also right now, blackberries are just unreal. Scott, I got these blackberries. They'll kill you. I swear to God, they taste like, but there's no tart to them at all. Okay, they're not that grapefruit kind of thing that blackberries have. They taste like bubble gum. I mean, and they're just regular blackberries, but they are absolutely amazingly sweet. I had to go back and buy more crates of them yesterday. So people at home watching, this is also Comic Artist Produce Secrets, as you know. We do talk about produce.
That was such a bad pun.
It's true though. And you know, right now grapes. What do you have? Green grapes?
Yeah, look.
Yeah, they're nice snap.
See the green?
And they're big. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll tell you honestly, I shouldn't say this on with your mega audience, but I'm going to say it right here.
Yeah.
In front of the world and future worlds that watch this. I don't think I've ever had a blackberry.
People have said that since I started talking about blackberries on my channel. I mean, people have said I've never had blackberries, and I don't understand how you. I'll be right back. Hold on.
Are you going to go get me a blackberry?
I am, because, you know.
If you come back dressed as a blackberry, like the old Fruit of the Loom.
I just think this is important, and I wanted to, you know, let you know. All right, let's get back down here. So these are the blackberries right now. These are actually, look at berry lovers. Berry lovers.
Berry lovers.
Not berry haters.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a berry hater, GTFO. Yeah. These are for berry lovers.
Unsubscribe right now.
Unsubscribe
to Comic Produce. If
you hate blackberries, unfriend me now. And yeah, unfriend me now. But look at the size of this. These are fantastic. Mm-hmm. And they're just great. Basically, they're tiny little blueberries in a cluster.
Oh, really? That does sound interesting.
I mean, so good.
And how long does the season last?
Yeah, so this is the season for blackberries. You don't want.
How long does it last?
Just a month, and they'll go back to being tart again. I mean, you can get them, and you can get them whenever you want, but they will go tart again. Jesse N, thank you for the super chat. I love blackberries. I knew someone who never had a radish. Well, I've never had a radish either, Jesse N. People are watching and sending me like tips to read their questions online. That's something about YouTube. So Jesse sent me $5 to read that about blackberries. Now, as for grapes,
sent you $5?
Yeah.
How?
super
Like your
chat.
PayPal or something, or?
You know, Cam, I shouldn't talk about this, but you can, there are people who do shows online and you can get a tip and people can tip you. It's called super chats. Okay. So when we're doing this chat, if people want to, it's common courtesy. If people want to get involved, they can talk, and they're talking right now amongst themselves. But if they want my attention, it's common courtesy. They send me a little tip, and then I read what they say to you, to the room.
That doesn't sound like common courtesy. That sounds like extortion.
It's not extortion. I'm not forcing them to do this. It's definitely bribery.
Well, do you read people's questions who don't give you tips?
Sometimes, but I don't have to. I don't feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I mean, look, you know, I've got the same grapes that you have right here. And yeah, seriously, the grocer actually came in and I took these grapes from him directly. Like he was
so
on.
You're actually working now, and you're making money to eat blackberries, and I'm sitting here for free.
That's right.
I think it's a common courtesy.
All the tips go to your mother.
Okay.
You want me to
My mother just came in. My mother just poked her head in.
Oh yeah.
And she suggested all my tips at least should go to her.
Okay. I'll send you $2.50.
Oh, for that one?
We'll whack it up. We'll whack up these tips that we're getting. All right. God, these grapes are really, really good. The other thing to get, now you can wait a month, are giant navel oranges.
This has become comics produce secrets.
Yeah. Okay, but we'll get back to Al Milgrom. Talk about meeting Al Milgrom.
Did you say meeting?
Did you meet him, or was it just over the phone that you interviewed Al Milgrom?
No, I did get to meet him. What happened was I was in college, and I wanted to expand the Poughkeepsie, the reach of the Poughkeepsie paper, student paper, and so there's a guy. His name was Saul Gordon. He was a professor in Syracuse who had done a video, and so I called him up and said, "Can I interview you?" And he's like, "Sure." So I went up and I interviewed him, and then I was like, "Wow, that was easy." And so I called Chuck Scarborough, who was a newscaster in New York, and he's like, "Yeah, come on down, Scott." So I went down, and then I called up Isaac Asimov, and this was like way before Publicist and everything. I looked up. I mean, do you know how many Isaac Asimovs there were in the New York phone book? Just one.
Yeah, I thought you were going to surprise me and say 80. I was going to be like,
that's why I set you up.
Yep.
And so he picked up his phone. He's like, "Oh yeah, certainly, I'd be happy to be interviewed." And so I was like, "Wow, this is so cool." So what happened was Al Milgrom was, I believe, the artist. He was the artist of the Guardians of the Galaxy books that were the ones that made it into the intensive care ward at the hospital 5 years earlier. And so the very, very first time I remember reading a comic book, I didn't read it as if, there's 50 years of history. My first reaction upon reading it was like, wow, somebody has to write this and somebody has to draw it. And, it says lettering, like, what is lettering? And so I found the whole thing so fascinating. And so that when I got to the point that I was writing these articles and interviewing these people, I thought, oh, this gives me an opportunity to find out exactly how comic books are made. And this was long before, YouTube channels and, so many other ways now that we can learn about comic books. And so I interviewed him, and it went really well. He was a great guy, very informative. And he also handed me a handful of plots. And at the time, that's exclusively how Marvel worked, plots first and scripts. And so I took them home and read them, and I tried a few of my own. And then 2 weeks later, when the newspaper came out, I called them and I said, "Oh, hey, I'm downtown. Let me give you this college newspaper article that I wrote." And he's like, "Okay." And so I met him in the lobby, and I said, "Oh, and here, I took a few of these things. I made up a few plots. Could you look at them?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, okay." And so He did that maybe 2 or 3 times, and each time I pretended that I was coming down in the city, and I'm just in the neighborhood. Do you mind if I stop by? And he's like, sure. And then finally, he stopped coming into the lobby and sent his assistant, who was Ann Nocenti, and it was then her job to be polite to me until she eventually became an editor, and then she sent her assistant editor out to blow me off. But the good thing is that through that experience, I kept meeting more and more people and getting more and more feedback on the stories. So that was really kind of my way into Marvel, was by doing these college interviews and then making these very, very, very tenuous relationships with editors. And I say that because I did that for 6 years.
It was 6 years of you making friends with people like Ann Nocenti and Tom DeFalco.
6 years I don't think of it as 6 years of making friends. I think of it as 6 years of being rejected and having rejection letters. I had so many rejection letters, they covered the wall of my bedroom. And yeah, and again, this was before email. Like, they'd actually send you an envelope, and you'd rip it open, and it would be like, I'm sorry, you're not good enough to write for us at this time. And this went on for years. And then one day I got a rejection letter from Tom DeFalco. And at the end of the letter, he wrote, P.S. This isn't as bad as the last one.
Nice.
Right? I was thrilled.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that was like my first, like, I don't know, interaction, as opposed to just being told.
And it's encouraging. It's like, you stink, but you stink less.
Yes, you
like
stink
you're
less.
getting less stinky.
Yes, and even now, all these years later, every time I sit down to write a story, in my head, I think this story just has to stink just a little less
than
the last one. Yeah.
That's personal growth. That's called personal growth.
Yeah.
Wow. So eventually, Tom DeFalco gave in to your charm, as we all have, and and hired you to do what?
I'm sorry, say that again.
He gave in to you and he hired you. What was your first gig? Because
oh no, he didn't hire me. Oh well, it's funny. I very, very, very rarely tell this story, but I will tell it for you.
Thank you.
I had learned that Power Man and Iron Fist was up for grabs because whoever was writing it was leaving and somebody else was coming on, and that was the good thing about constantly being, a bug in their ear, was, I would get these kind of inside scoops. So I wrote a treatment for Danny O'Neill, was the editor, and he was nice enough to read it, and he said, I really like this inventory story. And I sent him an idea about how I would go in this direction, and this is what I would do for the next 6 months. And he was like, wow, this is really good. I would really like to work with you. You're a new writer. I hadn't written anything at that time. And so while that plot was sent out to the artist, I was like, oh, I got to figure out how to do this as a script, so that way he'll see that I'm really good, I'm really dedicated. And so I wrote what I, in my insane 23-year-old self, version of what I thought a comic book script was. And I had gotten this huge pad of paper, and on one side of the paper I wrote the words, on the other side I wrote pictures of what I thought the script would be, and it was all written out by hand, all 20 pages, 22 pages at the time. And I'm sure he thought, oh my God, what did I do? I mean, it was just I don't know, it was like a Jackson Pollock version of a comic book script. And he got it in, and he very sweetly called me up and was just like, and I admit I thought you were farther along than you were, because these ideas were really good and you were able to express them really well, but I don't have time to teach somebody how to write a comic book from scratch.
Oh.
So I was like, I totally got it. I mean, it was Denny, so and then I didn't get another gig for 6 years.
Mm.
And it was 6 years of me convinced that I could do this for a living, and me being the only one that was convinced of that. So, and then what happened was I had, there's this comic book called Marvel Comics Presents, which was a series of 8-page stories. And
God, in 1986, I was on a school field trip to Washington, D.C. in the 6th grade. And I went to a comic shop. All the other kids, they let us loose to go get lunch in this mall area. And there was a comic book shop. And I went in there and bought the first issue with my lunch money. First 2 issues, because it was bi-weekly. And they were both out. Of Marvel Comics Presents 1 and 2. And I read them on the bus, and I was hungry. And that was
No, I didn't start with 1 and 2. But what happened was I had learned that, they were, for people that don't know, they were 4 stories per issue every 2 weeks, as opposed to every other book, which was 1 story a month.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant the editor had to work with 4 writers, 4 pencilers, 4 inkers, 4 colorists, twice a month. So that was 8. 8. They were putting out 8 stories, as opposed to most editors who were putting out 1. And when you're an editor of your book, you can just say, oh, I want Daredevil to do this, or I want Wolverine to do that, and you make it so. But when you're an editor that's dealing with an anthology, first you have to get somebody to write a Daredevil story, and then you have to go to the Daredevil editor and have to get it approved. And the people who are writing the Daredevil stories can't be like, in this issue, Daredevil sees, because then, the editor of Marvel Comics Presents goes to the editor of Daredevil and says, oh yeah, I have the story where Daredevil sees, and he's like, well, that's not going to happen.
Well, so, that could happen now in today's Marvel Comics, to be fair.
Certainly, but even then, within the context of the episodes per month. But they wouldn't let somebody who's writing an 8-page story change the continuity in a different direction.
Not back
then. So, and so the editor of Marvel Comics Presents was stuck because the only way he could get anything approved was to almost have nothing happen in the stories. And that made for boring stories. And so I examined all this, and I was like, there's a whole bunch of characters out there through a Contest of the Champions who were, Shamrock from Ireland, and the Arabian Knight from Saudi Arabia, and the American Eagle, and El Agua from
El Agua, the water.
No, the eagle. What's eagle for Spanish for eagle? What's that?
I said, I misheard you. And now I want to know.
No, you didn't misheard me. I said the wrong word.
El Agua.
Yeah. But the thing is that there are all these characters that nobody was using and nobody wanted them. And so I said to the editor, why don't you let me do the Global Village series, like a series of 8-pagers that focus on these characters that no other editor has any dominion over. And then that made his life so much easier, because then he could have these stories that had, I could tell the origin of Shamrock, and it's a silly name, but in the origin of Shamrock, it was somebody who only got her powers because her brother, who was supposed to have the powers, died because of this IRA incident. And so it was this, kind of deep story about the father's hatred for his daughter because she wound up being the representative of everything he believed when he had always assumed it would be his son. So it was like this, you took a very silly character like Shamrock, and I was able to write this, pretty intense story. And I could do that times, 40 characters. And suddenly the editor had, I went from selling nothing to selling 3 stories in 1 week. And then 3 weeks later, I had sold 16 stories. And then a month after that, I had 40 stories queued up. And then suddenly I was a comic book writer. So
That's fantastic. That's how it happens. You just got to make yourself useful. You got to find your niche and kind of hop in there, right? And then never leave. That's what happened to me. So, how long were you doing that anyway? How long were you on the Marvel Comics Presents series? Did you get to do all those stories?
Yeah, I did every story, and I even stayed on a little longer. You know, I'll tell you, this is kind of an interesting story. When I was doing Marvel Comics Presents, I was working with a kid named Rob Liefeld, and we were doing this Beast 8-part Beast story. And he had started the first 2 parts, and then he became the Rob Liefeld and became very famous, and we all know his story, or parts of his story.
Mhm.
And so somebody else needed to do these 8-page, do the rest of the Beast story. So I was always on the lookout for new talent, and I was at a comic book convention in New York, and this kid comes up. He's like 17 years old, and he comes up with a notepad of, not like a sketch pad, like a notebook, a school notebook.
Yeah.
And he had drawn a bunch of characters into the notebook. And I said, "Oh, you know, what do you got there?" And he's like, "Well, none of the editors will look at it because it's not, you know, the way it's not on a sketch pad and, or, you know, or comic book pages." And I looked at it, I was like, "Wow, you are, you know, you're really something." I said, "Why don't you, I have a plot in my bag," and I gave him a plot, and I said, "You're staying here in New York. Why don't you don't go out with your friends tonight, just take the story and kind of break it down to see how you would tell the story." And he's like, "Okay." And the next day he came back with 20 pages of thumbnails. And I was like, "Oh my God." I said, "You are really, you know, you're very, very talented kid." So we worked together for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months of, like, I would give him a plot and he would draw a few pages and we'd go back and forth. And finally he got the job doing the rest of the Beast story, which was a big deal for, you know, a kid. And what we found out was, when we sent him the plot, the legal people at Marvel said he can't draw until he's 18, so he can't start drawing for another 3 months. And 3 months later, he turned in his first 8-page story. But that kid, at the time, his name was, and actually it still is, was Jay Lee. So
I was gonna say, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Jay Lee started really young.
yeah.
Wow, you discovered Jay Lee.
I discovered Jay Lee, and I also kind of nursed him from, you know, a kid who, like, literally showed up. You know, honestly, it was like,
Just like
it was
you.
literally, he, like, drawn his notebook. What's that?
Isn't that interesting that, like, you saw in him, because he said other people aren't looking at my work because it's not formatted correctly.
Oh
Which
yeah,
is,
and you can't play. I mean, you can't blame the editors for not not looking at, like, a notepad. You know, but having said that, it's kind of funny because I didn't think about this until, maybe it's because I told you that story about what's his name, about Denny looking at my work and going, "No way," looking at that script and going, "No way," is maybe that's what I responded to in Jay's notepad. You know,
that was just
like,
investing. You did that to help yourself. To help.
maybe.
This was a symbolic act of, like, hey, I'm not going to do to this guy what Denny did to me.
Well, I mean, I would have to, I don't think that Denny did anything to me. I mean, I totally understand,
He was
you
cruel.
know, that I wasn't ready, you know, and it took me a while to be ready, and eventually I was, but I don't feel that Denny did anything to me.
He
I don't want
demoralized.
that to be the headline on Bleeding Cool. LOBDELL complains
I'm
that,
trying to get. I'm trying to get you to say something. No, I'm just kidding. No, but I mean, it is interesting that those two things kind of correlate there. And
well, you know, it's funny, to this day, I still, you know, anytime I can find an artist or find a writer, or, you know, even when this movie came out, I would get, my email was on IMDb, and so different writers have written to me saying, could you look at this script, or can we, and, I mean, I try to always, I certainly can't do it virtually every time, but over the years, and I'll just tell you one last story. One time I was at DC. I could get into the DC offices, and Marvel was the only people that gave me work, but there were enough DC people that they would,
They knew
take a
you
meeting, but it never went anywhere. But it would, I could go and hang out in Brian Augustin's office and Elliot Magan's office. And there was a kid who couldn't get into DC, but I was like, you're really good. I'm going to go over there. Let me just take your samples and I'll bring them over and drop them on a desk and see what people think. And I brought him in and I showed him to all the editors, and editors were, editors always need an excuse to say why they won't hire somebody. And, they would go like, he's good. Okay. He's good. But look how he draws the cape. Like, look at this cape. It doesn't look like a cape.
Mm.
And that's what, like 2 or 3 people going, yeah, Scotty's good, but not the cape thing. But that kid's name was Joe Quesada. So
you discovered Rob Liefeld.
What's that?
You basically discovered Rob Liefeld, Jay Lee, and Joe Quesada in your way. Did you discover?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've worked with. Oh, I can't even tell you how many people I've worked with, but it's just so funny that the point of the story was like back then when I was nobody, and I was nobody for a long time. Even as a nobody, I was always trying to, I had this kind of mentality of, if I can get in the door, I'll bring you in the door as well.
Help you, yeah.
Even if it means, you get work and I'm off to somewhere else, it didn't matter. I always felt we all had to help each other. So, and I still do. So
I feel that way too. I always think about, I meet young talent and just, I mean, some people are ready to go. Some people aren't. But I was in South Africa doing a signing in Johannesburg, and I met this gentleman named Jason Master, and he was, I mean, his last name couldn't have been more appropriate. And he showed me this beautiful portfolio. And I said, have you shown this to anyone? He's like, no, I don't know who to show. And he's not working at DC Comics. It's like, well, people, I can show this to people at DC Comics and probably get you work. And yeah, now he's a comic book artist, and he has been working for, 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. So that, I mean, just having that opportunity to sort of discover new talent and help them along is it's a privilege. But boy, you've discovered some big names. Jay Lee stepping in for Rob Liefeld. Those are some big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
He
didn't much look like the Jay Lee he is now, but but he was at the time.
Then he was minimalist, and he drew a lot of like big, gigantic, muscular guys with veins. He drew Namor at age
18, yeah, right?
No, the Legend was 16 when I was a kid. Jay Lee I was 16 when he was 16, and he was very, very encouraging his story, because people were saying he was working at Marvel while he was in high school, and that was
that wasn't
that wasn't true.
Well, I mean, like I say, he couldn't start until he was 18. So.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about someone else that you met and shepherded along, I think, on a big, big, big series, because you in the 1990s, you were all about the X-Men. Chris Bacalo, right? Was he yours? Was he your find?
No, I mean, he'd worked at he'd done, I think, Shade the Changing Man, I believe it was. Before that, he'd done a bunch of Vertigo stuff. I think if I can lay claim to anything having to do with Chris, it was this notion that he'd done such fantastic work on Vertigo, and he got hired by Bobby Chase to do Ghost Rider 29 and 29.9 annual, and I saw it, and we were like, well, X-Men Limited #1 is coming out, and the artist who had it for 6 months wasn't working out, so Bob Harris and I were like, well, let's give it to this guy. He has such an interesting look. I mean, it's certainly a different look. And during that time, I had been asked to redo the New Mutants, and I was like, okay. But as I was working on the idea, and I realized I was going to move them out of the mansion, and I was not going to use Xavier, and I was going to not make it about becoming an X-Men as much as it was going to be about learning about your powers and trying to, fit into the world and blah, blah, blah. While that was happening, we were searching for the right artist to do the book. And so 6 pages into X-Men Unlimited, I went into Bob. I go, I figured out who we have to get to do Generation X. And he's like, Chris. I'm like, oh. And so what happened was I called up Chris and I said, listen, I'm doing this new book, Generation X. You have to do it with me. He's like, yeah, no, I don't. I'm not an X-Men artist. And I said, but you're amazing and you should do Generation X. He's like, yeah, but I don't draw like Jim Lee, Scott. And I said, there's so many people that are drawing like Jim Lee. I don't want you to draw like Jim Lee. I want you to draw like Chris Pacello.
Is it
And
Pacello?
he's like,
How to pronounce it, by the way?
Yeah, you did mispronounce it, but I didn't want to correct you.
Pacello. No, I appreciate it.
Okay, yeah. So it's Chris Pacello. And so he said, he goes, I do weird stuff. Like I did an issue of Shade, and it was 2 people, a boy and a girl, and they were sitting on a stoop in Brooklyn, and they're having this heart-to-heart conversation, and I drew the whole thing as knees for 2 issues. I'm sorry, for 2 pages of just knees, and they made me redraw it. So you don't want to. That's how I think. And I said, Chris, if you give me 2 pages of knees, I'll draw 2 pages of knees. That's our deal. Whatever you want to do, with these stories, I'm not gonna do anything to try to rein you in. And so still he was not interested. And about 2 months go by and he calls me up and he says, yeah, I told my wife that I turned down an X-Men book, and she said, call them right now and beg them to. So I actually did not discover Chris Pacello, but I certainly, pulled him along by that horn in his nose. That's stubborn. What's that?
Brought him into the mainstream, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I say, he was a very stubborn guy, and he is still a stubborn guy in the best way. He's a great guy, great talent. And, he, that's what I love about him is his, his stubbornness. So.
Did you work with Jim Lee?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Jim and I, it was the strangest working relationship when we very first started, because it was X-Men number 6, and it was the first X-Men job I ever got. And what happened, it was the night of the Marvel Christmas party, and I was in my Marvel Comics Presents editor's office, and Bob Harris walks in and he says, Scott, walk with me. And I'm like, okay. And the only time Bob and I had ever spoken before that was we got in it wasn't even a fight. It was just like to each other over the Beast story, because I had written a Beast story and I got it approved, and then he read it and he's like, well, I don't want to touch on that aspect of the story. And I said, well, that's not very fair. And so that was, I figured it didn't matter if I got in a fight with the X-Men editor, because there's no way I'm ever writing the X-Men. So it didn't matter. And so he said, walk with me. And we walked down to his office, and he has 20 pages of thermal fax paper, so it's all like, heated, how those thermal papers were terrible. And he goes, you got 22 pages in 24 hours. Can you do this? Can you script this book? And I said, sure. Because I figured in the next day, either people would say, wow, look what he did in 24 hours. That's amazing. Or they would say, it's terrible, but he only had 24 hours to do it. So what can you expect? But what happened was that those pages were 6 finished pages by Jim Lee. And then the rest of them were circles and X's where Rogue would be standing and where Gambit is standing. And there was no plot. There was just these thermal pages of story. And they said, oh, Gambit and Rogue talk, and then they fly away. And so I'm like, okay. Yeah. And so so that's how we worked together for 6 months. And about 3 months into that is when all the guys announced they were going to start a new company called Image Comics. I don't know if you remember this. It was a long time ago.
I was going to ask you, what did you think of that when it was happening? And I can't remember. I can't recall if you ever came along, or were you?
No, I never did come along. I was I was a writer, and they were not. I don't think they felt they needed writers at the time. So, I mean, most of the guys. I don't know. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like Rob Liefeld was working with Eric Stevenson, and Jim Lee was working with Brandon Choi. Like they were all working with their friends. Yeah, which is great. They should do that. But at the time, it wasn't like, oh, all these writers are going to sneak off and let's go, let's grab the X-Men writer and bring him too. There's nothing that wasn't the point of the company. So, so I didn't go over there, but what was fun for me is that I don't have all the old top 10 comic books or anything from those times, but for 2-3 years, Image was just kicking our butt by, hundreds of thousands of copies. And then it started to level off. And I think it was Age of Apocalypse where we finally took the throne back and, never really relinquished it again. So,
yeah. And that was you.
So, yeah, that was me. So that was the fun part of, people think of like Marvel at the time. They're like, oh, they were rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And it's like, no, I was ordering ice up for my drink, and figuring out how I was going to, beat down this iceberg that was Image. So, yeah. And it took a while, but, finally, we were able to kick them in the butt and,
that was a big deal.
Spank them and send them home.
Age of Apocalypse. I got a super chat here from Master Chudy. Thank you for the super chat. It says, Scott, you are the man. I enjoy Red Hood and the Outlaws. Currently favorite book to review, and you and Dexter Soy kill it. Jason and Artemis are nice chemistry. Is fire. Bizarro is cool. Okay, are nice. Chemistry is fire, and Bizarro is cool. Always look forward to the next issue. So that's from Master Chudy. Thank you again for the super chat. So they're liking your Red Hood and the Outlaws. We'll get to that. We'll get to your DC time. So basically, didn't you write Fantastic Four for a little while? What happened there?
Yeah, I wrote 3 issues of Fantastic Four. I was supposed to be the writer on Fantastic Four with Heroes Reborn, but they everybody was really pretty mad at me because when Heroes Reborn, was it called that, right? Heroes Reborn?
Jim Lee?
Yeah, Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld. When that was first announced internally, they said, oh, Jim and Rob are going to come over and do these books. I was like, oh my God, that is the most amazing idea, like to jumpstart these characters and, with talent that was not necessarily people that have been looking at the comic books the same way they had been for, 20, 30 years. And so I was like, sign me up for that. So I got signed up for it. And I didn't realize at the time how much the resentment at Marvel, that people at Marvel had for this idea that was generated from all the way up. And so I thought it was a great idea, but between everybody all the way up and me here, everybody in between hated it. Because it was all about, people not having faith in editorial's vision of these jobs and stuff. So when it was time to do Heroes Return, and I was tensions had been running pretty high between me and Marvel. And
why?
Because I because I kind of sided with this new vision of, you know, a way to produce comic books, which wasn't, you know, all the guys in the bullpen and all the editors, you know, the kind of incestuous relationship that went on with editorial, and you know what I'm saying?
The people that they
And
know,
so,
creators they're used to working with, constantly just feeding them and et cetera, like outreach, trying
yeah,
to.
I mean, I think it was, yeah, I think we've seen it a few times over the years where you take, like, even John Byrne going over from Marvel and saying, you know, I will do Superman and I will change and I'll make a Man of Steel and I'll do all the, it was like, you know, sometimes you need a fresh set of eyes. And I was probably the most established writer at the time, you know, working on the X-Men books. And my feeling was, this is a great idea. And everybody else's feeling was, you know, this is horrible and it makes us look like we don't know what we're doing. And so,
You know what it felt like? From my perspective, it felt like Marvel had beaten Image. Like Image was coming back to Marvel again. I mean, there were a bunch of different ways to look at it, but
you might have felt that from the outside, but from the inside, everybody was like, you know, suddenly all those guys that were working on those books were not working there, and suddenly the editors who had been in charge of Captain America for the last 15 years, were suddenly watching, you know, Rob Liefeld draw Captain America like he was a Frigidaire, you know.
Right, yeah.
And so what's that?
So it was all worth it. It was no, probably not. Yeah, I had Mark Waid on, and he talked about this very issue where, you know, the Captain America thing from his perspective was he and Ron Garney were putting together a really, really good run on Captain America. They had just started, and they were kind of kicked to the curb for Rob Liefeld and Jeff Loeb, their Heroes Reborn thing. So Mark Waid was rather upset about the Heroes Reborn thing. To sort of bolster.
I probably would have been too if I got fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you were hired.
What's that?
But you were hired, and you were working with Jim Lee on Fantastic Four, which was actually really good. I mean, that run that Jim Lee did on Fantastic Four Reborn was excellent.
Yeah, well, and you know what happened was this is weird. I don't talk about this very often, but I've never talked about it other than maybe a panel or two, but I'll talk about it now. Is issue 6 of the Heroes Reborn titles, I plotted that crossover, and that month I wound up writing 5 of the top 10 comic books and plotting the other 3.
Yeah.
And I looked at the list and I was like, wow, I mean, like, where do I go? Like, do I try to get all 10 top selling comic books? Like, is that like, you know, is this where I am in my career? Like, that's, you know, and at the time I was thinking, you know what, I'm working 70 hours a week. There's clearly something about my brain that connects with an audience. So I can keep doing this, or I can try my hand at Hollywood, which is still, you know, writing and stories and, you know, moving images. And, you know, I don't think there's any real difference between the skill set that is used for a comic book or a comic book script or a movie script. And so I had in my head that I had one foot out the door anyway. And so my feeling was, I want to challenge myself to do other things. Marvel was not particularly thrilled with the fact that I was, you know, I don't know, I don't want to say an enemy within. I don't think I was that, but I hadn't come out in favor of the comic book establishment at Marvel.
You picked the wrong side.
So I picked the wrong side. And so I had about 8 months worth left on my contract, 6 months left on my contract. And they came back with this really low number, like, you know, really, really low number compared to what my contract had been. And I said, you know what, I'm fine. I'm going to take my chances out in the real world. And that day, they were like, well, if you're going to leave Fantastic Four in 6 months or 8 months, we'll just replace you now. And I said, well, I didn't say I would leave. I said, I'm just not going to sign a contract. Yeah, but if you're not going to sign a contract, then you might not be around. So we're not going to. So they gave Fantastic Four to Chris Claremont, ironically, with issue 4, even though I had plotted a few more issues in. But I mean, I would have stayed on Fantastic Four for, you know, at least as long as I stayed on X-Men, which was about 7 years. So,
Wow.
I mean, I love the Fantastic Four. It's awesome, but it was not in the stars. So
That's kind of how
I
they
did 3 issues, and to this day, people are like, those were the 3 best issues. Not ever, but certainly. I mean, it was a fun run, and I would have done it, but I would have stayed with it. But as it was, I didn't. So
they wanted you to stay for less money under
yeah,
contract.
which I didn't. You know, I didn't mind at the time because I don't. You know, like I'm very rarely.
All of the books were making money hand over fist for Marvel Comics. Let's be honest here. Let's be frank. You're writing all the top-selling comics for Marvel. You're making them a ton of money. The choices that you make and the people that you side with weren't necessarily politically advantageous. Sometimes, you know, sometimes you think about what's best for the company, maybe, rather than what people think. And wow, okay, so they wanted to pay you less and make you sign a contract to keep you immobile.
Yeah, and so yeah, but you know, like I said, I mean, if you want the God's honest truth, what happened was I had signed. What happened was Marvel and DC and Image were all fighting over the talent, and so Marvel started signing, you know, John Romita Jr., the Kuberts, like everybody, with these mega contracts. And then they came to me and they said, well, we want to lock you up with a mega contract. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me because I'm already writing the number 1 through 4 comic books. Why would you need to, you know, like, where am I going to go? I'm already like number 1. Am I going to go somewhere else and be number 5? Like, why would I do that? And so I was like, yeah, I don't really see any. So they made me this offer, and it was a ridiculous offer, ridiculous amount of money. And I'm like, all right, you know, I guess. So I signed it. And about 3 months later, the bottom dropped out of the industry. You know, like Heroes,
They bought Heroes.
distribution company, crash, and comic book stores were fading. And so the numbers on all the books started to level off. And I was fortunate because I think I spent another 3 years at this mega contract rate, which was ridiculous. You know, it was ridiculous because as the industry tanked, as the industry was here, I was up here. And so I understood why they would offer me less, but I felt, you know, I could get this less or maybe a little more anywhere else. So it wasn't the numbers that like we all remember in terms of, you know, how great those numbers were.
Yeah.
So it's a little more, but again, at the time I wasn't motivated by money. And even now, I mean, I'm still not, I mean, it's always great to have money, but I've never been, you know, somebody who's been motivated by money to really do anything. So,
yeah.
I will tell you that it's kind of interesting that like when I first started out, I was making like $35 a page. And I remember my first royalty check from Marvel Comics Presents, it was for $500. And I was like, oh my God, I was like doing cartwheels through my apartment in Yonkers. I was like, $500, I'm never going to have to work again. This whole royalty thing is amazing. Like, oh my God, $500. And at the time, you know, I eventually landed on X-Men. I told you that story. I wasn't planning on landing on X-Men. You know, that was never a goal. But suddenly I was there and I was writing it, and suddenly the money came in. And for years I said it was interesting because all I wanted to be was a comic book writer. And if I was making $35 a page, that was better than, you know, pushing buttons, third shift at IBM. But suddenly I was in the right place at the right time. And I always said it was like the money truck just backed up and, you know, took pitchforks of money and threw them in the front yard.
That didn't even occur to me. I didn't even realize you were rolling in the 90s.
Yeah, I was rolling for a long time. But the thing is that like, I was never like, I'm going to be a comic book writer and make a lot of money. You know, anybody who thought that would be an idiot. And so I was making money. But then, so there was a time that I was here and the money was chasing me. And then there came a point in my life where I was here and I was chasing the money. I was like, I gotta, you know, I gotta work. I gotta, you know, I gotta pick this project. I gotta figure out how to make the contract do this. And that became like very unfun because that's not really what I had signed up for. I signed up just to write comics.
When do you think that change happened? What year?
I would say between 2004, probably like 2004 to 2010, maybe. So, but
yeah.
You know, but like I say, it's funny because people would be like, well, you became a comic book writer, so you could make money. I said, no, there was no money when I got in. You know, it was like $35. In fact, this is kind of an interesting part of comic book history, since we're talking about Comic Book Pro secrets or whatever your thing is called. Sorry. Is that I was writing comic books when they decided they had to make comic books more equitable for the writers. And so they were like, if a comic book reaches 60,000 issues, you'll get 0.5% or 0.05%. And if it goes up to 100,000, you'll get 1%. And if it goes up to 200,000, you get, you know, 2 till finally, if it reaches 500,000, you get 4% of the cover price. And people were like, yeah, comic books are selling like, you know, 50,000 copies. So it was like this monopoly money version of, you know, yeah, you're going to make 4% of 500,000 copies. But then suddenly comic books went through this explosion, and now you're making 4% of a book that costs, you know, with a chromium cover that costs like almost $4, and they're printing almost 1 million copies, and suddenly that became more money than people could imagine. And it was because they made this ridiculous deal at a time when, you know, oh yeah, we'll give you 4% of 500,000. You know, so
every issue sold over 500,000. So
oh yeah, for years I did. What's that?
So if a book sells 500,001 copy, you're getting 4% of that one copy, just so people understand. And
for about 4 years, my books were selling like 700,000 copies a month.
Yeah, crazy. So, that's crazy money.
Yeah, and again, like nobody imagined it at the time. Nobody, you know.
Were you ever on
what's that?
Were you ever on one of the huge epic sellers like Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man 1, which sold 8 million copies? Did you ever have one of those?
X-Men 300 sold 1.3 million. So
that's great. That is great. What fun. We need to get back to that. Well, you know, what's funny is a lot of people, you know, like people say, well, you know, comic books are dying, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you know, I always said that if, you know, like kids don't read anymore. Kids don't read. Nobody reads. Kids don't read. And then some woman in England writes a book about a child wizard, you know, who lives under the steps
and goes to wizard school, and it becomes, this huge phenomenon that, saves an entire, I'm sure it saved the company, but it probably, but like there wouldn't be a Twilight if there wasn't a Harry Potter, and, yada, yada. And so I think that comic books are going to be saved when somebody does something that people want to really see again, or to see for the first time. And unfortunately, I mean, I probably Walking Dead is the best example of that. Like it was
keeping Image afloat. Walking Dead is keeping Image afloat. I mean, let's,
and I think for years, I mean, for a few years, it probably kept, the idea of comic books afloat, because, well, let me say that. I'll take that back. I don't think it kept comic books afloat, but I think what it did was it brought in a new audience of people that were not necessarily superhero fans, or it allowed people who were comic book fans to find something different. Like when I was writing, I, like you say, I've written the X-Men, I've written Superman, and when I'm on these books, people go like Superman, for example, they'll be like, Scott, I read Superman for 40 years, and because of you, I don't read it anymore. I'm reading something else. And I'm like, you're welcome, and thank you. You're welcome and thank you. Like, I do think that people need to, to grow and find things. Or people would come to me and say, like, I used to read the X-Men, but now I read something by Neil Gaiman. I'm like, well, that's great. That's what happens. You start out one thing, your tastes change over the years, and you try different things. And I think that Walking Dead was really the first time in a long time where we saw something that was not, Captain America being manipulated by somebody, and then at the end of the issue, the limousine pulls up, and you look in, and the window rolls down, and it's the Red Skull. It's like, oh my God, like how many times can we see that story? But enough times that people keep wanting to see it. There are guys that make a living off of bringing back Doc Ock and everybody for the 100th time. But I think that Walking Dead was an indication, or should be an indication, to the industry that people are willing to read comic books that are not, the same thing over and over and over again. So, I mean, I can't speak to the book now. I stopped at issue 86 because it got so oppressively oppressive that it wasn't in my nature to keep reading, but it's it was extremely well done. So
some people think that what's missing from comics is more representation, more diversity in characters. Like it does seem like most big popular superheroes are white males, heterosexual. You're famous for really revealing that one of Marvel's biggest male heroes, I would say, of the 1980s, North Star from Alpha Flight, was gay. What prompted that decision? Was that you?
I was doing. I needed to do an inventory story at the time, and when I first took over Alpha Flight, we needed an inventory story in the drawer, and my feeling was that North Star was always a very difficult character to enjoy because he was so angry all the time. He wasn't angry in a cool way like Wolverine was. He was angry, for reasons that I felt that his being closeted made him angry and kept him angry, because he would keep people at a distance with his anger, so that you didn't have to judge him about being a mutant. You didn't have to judge him about being homosexual, because he kept you away from him. And I felt that the only way to get him to grow as a character was for him to let that go and to just be who he was. And so I made that argument to my editor. Her name is Bobby Chase, and Bobby Chase's brother is also gay. So she was like, I love that you're, tackling this straight on. So she supported it. And then she went on to do Spirits of Vengeance. And the book needed an inventory story, and that issue went out, and, history was made. But it's funny is I was at a comic book convention recently, and I was on a panel, and somebody said, well, how do you feel about the diversity push in comics? And I said, I think diversity is a relatively recent term for something that I've been doing for 25 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at Generation X, Generation X was very heavily weighted female, and it was very heavily weighted towards characters of color, as I guess the term would be today. And the thing is at the time of the X-Men, when I did Generation X, there's no reason. I could have had 8 white male mutants and people wouldn't have blinked, but instead I felt that I wanted the book to represent what I would see when I was at conventions and look out at the crowd and go, oh, this is, this isn't a bunch of, straight white guys staring back at me. This is America. And so I started doing that, but I've been doing that for 25 years now. If you look at Teen Titans, when I did Rebirth, if you I'll say this, and I don't want, it's hard to say it without sounding like a jerk, but not a jerk, but we've seen a lot of relaunches in comic books over the years. That's become like the big craze is relaunch. And I remember I'll just say this, is that I have, like with Teen Titans, for example, I could have had Wonder Girl, Kid Flash, Superboy, Robin, and 3 other famous characters. But instead I introduced Blink, who was a gay Mexican teenager, and I introduced Skitter, who was this African American cyborg character, and then I used Solstice, who was from India. And the thing is that I over the years, I could always do what use the fan favorites and get whatever praise I could get for that, or I could take the fact that I was launching a new book and introduce new characters, and specifically introduce characters that were not straight white male characters.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays people say, oh, that's diversity, you're doing diversity. I guess if that's the word for what I've been doing since Generation X and even before that, then okay, that's a word, but it's not it's a new word for an old phenomenon, I think.
So the way I listened to you talk about this, it wasn't particularly important to you that there be a gay male character on Alpha Flight, was it? It was just that you decided to, you with some interest in psychology, kind of lived with this character in your head for a little while because you were writing a story. You thought about him intensely, and you, not because there needed to be a gay character, but because this character was gay from your assessment. Yeah. So it was necessary for you to write a story, and maybe you would get some negative feedback, maybe you would get some plaudits, it would be controversial in either way, but it didn't matter because it was true to the story. North Star was gay, and he always was, and putting it out there like that was your job. Mm-hmm. Am I right or wrong? Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, I didn't, I did not, there's a funny story about, I talked about Isaac Asimov. Yeah, there's a time when you could get Stanley on the phone. you know, now everybody has publicists and blah, 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 even, you know, comic book people. But I heard a story where that morning when it came out and it hit the press and it was in the New York Times and everything, and like Marvel called me up, the public relations people were like, don't do any interviews, don't say anything to anybody. I'm like, okay. But what happened is they called Stan Lee up in LA, you know, which is a few hours later. And it's just like, you know, Stan, as you can see by his cameos, loves to, you know, the spotlight. So they called him up. He's like, yeah, what can I do for you? And they're like, yeah, how do you feel about one of your characters being gay? And he's like, let me call you back. You know, so like to him, I mean, it was just kind of funny because it was, you know, none of us were expecting it to be a big deal. And so when it was a big deal, it was, you know, it was funny because, you know, we were just putting out this next issue of the comic book and, you know, it became a big deal, but it wasn't, you know.
Was it more of a
but I love the fact that Stan was, you know, taken unaware, like, what? So.
Did Stan ever put out a statement about it? Like,
oh yeah, I'm sure he did. I mean, like probably hours later, it was just, you know, like literally, you know, you just, you know, usually when he gets a call, it's like, you know, Spider-Man is going to be at the World Series. What do you think? Oh, I love Spider-Man. He's going to be great at the World Series. You know, he's not his place to, you know, not really what he's.
Right.
You know,
but. So making North Star gay or writing this, you didn't make him gay. He was gay. So writing this. Well,
he would be gay from now on.
Now hold on a second, because there's another character on the X-Men, Iceman, who came out as gay recently, and honestly, you
know, do me a favor, bring everybody up to speed on that. I'm gonna run to the bathroom real quick. Okay.
This is the same thing that happened with Dan Slott, by the way. I kept Dan Slott on. Like, go ahead, go. I'll keep talking there. But I kept Dan Slott on way too long. Like, he never gave me any indication that like this was, hey man, I'm uncomfortable right now. Questions kept coming in from the fans, and I just kind of kept him going. And finally, I thought, you know, I'm going to cut this short now because I'm sure like 2.5 hours is way too long to be keeping Dan Slott on the line. And you guys didn't see this, but when I hung up with Dan, or when I hung up with you guys and kept him on the line, I said, how did it go? What do you think? Was it good? And Dan said, I had to piss for the last 45 minutes. I was just like, you could have said something. Like this is what just happened now with Scott is awesome. That's how you have to be. If you have to go to the bathroom, by all means, just let me know and take a little break. Oh, Matt, thank you for the super chat. That's a huge super chat. Thank you. Merry Christmas, EVS. Thanks for these rockin' interviews. It's my pleasure, and really, Scott is being so kind, and I can tell Scott has had some rocky moments in his career, like highs and lows, and he is being so cool about talking about them and telling stories, being honest, giving us information that I don't think he's given to other people before in interviews. I really appreciate it. I want to push him a little bit about North Star being gay. I want to see if his feeling is that it was more of a good thing publicity-wise, or did he feel a little bit of like pushback from fans, or how he felt about it, and if it was a good thing, was that incentive for other creators to be more kind of less obvious and perhaps, let me use their own word, more problematic diversity situations with characters where they might not be it might not be appropriate. Hi, Scott's back.
Hi. Yay.
How come you're not showing up on the screen? Talk again.
La 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 la.
There you are. Okay, good. So what I was saying basically, and I was letting the fans know that this was going to be where I was going to take you from here. The first thing I want to know is your the North Star situation. Did you view it more in terms of the reaction that you received? Was it a more positive thing for you as a writer, as a creator, or was it controversial in a negative way for you as a creator? Like, which was heavier on the scale of?
Oh, I would think it was 100% positive in every way that it could have been, professionally and personally. I didn't get any negative feedback from editorial. To this day, it's 25 years later, and I'll be at a comic book convention, and at least once a convention, somebody asked me to sign that issue. And, like, I don't, certainly there are gay characters on Modern Family now, the #1 show, uh, but at the time, the idea of a gay superhero was something that hadn't ever really been considered up until that point. So when people come up to me and ask me to sign that comic book, it almost always comes with a story about how, they had been younger and closeted and had no way of, that being gay didn't have a representation in, this fantasy world or this hobby or, this favorite book or that, experience. And so that's been very gratifying even 25 years later. So, but what happened was, it was funny because when I started Alpha Flight, I was in a bake-off, they call it, where, as a writer, you say, this is what I'm going to do with the characters. And I said, I want to take these 16 character team and shrink it down to 5 characters and focus on those 5 characters. And she's like, that's great. And then, like I said, 3 issues in, she left. And the editor that took over had also been in the bake-off. And he had wanted to expand the membership, from 16 even bigger. And so he and I were completely at cross purposes because I was trying to focus on 5 and he wanted teen. And I was kind of resisting him. And he called me into his office and said, this isn't working out. I'm going to have to let you go. And I said, okay, that's fine. Because what happened, the odd part is that the week before that, I had written my first issue of the X-Men. And so he said, I'm going to have to let you go. And I said, okay. And then I went on to write the X-Men for 7 years. So people on the outside saw me introduce this gay character and get fired. And they said, oh, were you punished? I said, well, if getting to write the X-Men is punishment, then sure, punish me up the wazoo. So, but so that was, so there was never any negative experience with outing North Star. So,
what about outing Bobby Drake? I'm going to ask you for your opinion on this. If you were writer of the X-Men, you were editor of the X-Men, has Iceman always been gay?
I mean, I only know up until the time that I was writing him. I don't know. I mean, I feel that, yeah, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because I don't want to disrespect anything that, has come since and decisions that other writers make when they're on a book.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I've been the guy who's taken over books and I've been the guy who's had books taken over after I've left. So, neither one is the funnest experience in the world.
I'm putting you on the fans want to know this. Believe me, they just wanted your take on this. You're the writer.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. I think that Bobby's conflicts worked better as a metaphor than as a device, I guess would be the way I would put it. I think that, like, certainly I had, during the time that I wrote the character, I wrote him as a person who was conflicted by his parents' disapproval of his genetic condition, which was being a mutant. In recent years, his inner conflict over his genetic makeup, which is now his homosexuality, is the way they're telling that story.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you stepped back 35 feet and watched Bobby's life story, the stories that I wrote are really not any different than the stories that are being written now. But it's only when you get close up and you realize that, okay, what he's dealing with now is, and it's a very bizarre, the time travel and the younger version of himself and all the stuff that goes into writing a comic book. But I don't know that they're really that much different. So if the new writers have come on and decided that Bobby has been closeted for, all the years that he's been written, I wouldn't.
65 years. That's a
What's
long
that?
time. 65 years. That's a long time to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that as anything that I would, object to. But I do think, like I say, that for me, when I was writing it, this story worked better as a metaphor. So
yeah, you could stay in the closet for 65 years. Liberace did. I mean, it's possible, right? I mean, would you want to come back to X-Men now and get your hands on these characters again? And I mean, the X-Men especially. I love the X-Men, and I love what you did. Do you ever look at them and say, give?
Well, I mean, I always thought the X-Men worked best when they were evolving and changing. And even when I left the book eventually with the age of, with Zero Tolerance, Operation Zero Tolerance, it had Bobby as the leader, and it had, Marrow and Sabra and Cecilia Reyes and all these characters. And even now, like, I mean, the second I left, the second I was out the door, Kitty and Bobby and Nightcrawler, and it was like, they got rid of anything new and they brought in everything old. And, to me, if I was ever going to do the X-Men again, it would not be the Age of Apocalypse X-Men I wrote. It wouldn't be Zero Tolerance. It wouldn't be, Chris and Dave's X-Men, which is my favorite. But it would be a new, some old, some new manifestation of being an X-Men and being mutants and stuff. So I would, I'd certainly love the challenge of making the X-Men relevant again. But it would not be, it wouldn't be like a greatest hits of Scott Lobdell, even though there are probably people who argue that Scott Lobdell never had any greatest hits.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
What's that?
Yes, you did have great hits on X-Men. Your X-Men stuff is the most memorable of the 90s, and that's my opinion. So let's talk about you coming back to DC. Let's talk about Red Hood and the Outlaws. The new 52. How did you get approached about the new 52?
Actually, it's Christmas year, on a Christmas weekend. Bob Harris had become editor-in-chief, and I remember I was in LA and I got a text from Fabian, and it said, when are you going to start writing Batman? And I was like, what are you talking about? Why would I write Batman? And he said, oh, because Bob became editor-in-chief. And I had been out of Marvel and never in DC for many years. And over the years, while I was doing work for other companies, I discovered, like, Jeff Loeb's a perfect example. Jeff Loeb, great guy. But we were very close when we worked on the X-Men together. But when he went off to Hollywood, and started doing, Smallville and working his way into Marvel Productions, that relationship ended. So over the years, there have been many, many, many people that I worked with very, very closely who I had never heard from again. And so when Bob took over the X-Men, took over DC, I sent him an email saying, congratulations, and honestly did not expect to hear from him because that's just the nature of the business. About 2 or 3 months later, I was coming to New York for the holidays, and I had been invited to his party, and he's like, "Oh, you missed the party, but can you have lunch tomorrow?" And I said, "Okay." So I went to lunch, and I was at DC, and Jim Lee gets on the elevator. I said, "Oh, Jim, how's it going?" He's like, "Good, good." I said, "Yeah, I'm supposed to have lunch with Bob today." And he goes, "Yeah, you're having lunch with me too." And I said, "Oh, okay, that's cool. We haven't seen each other in a long time." And at that lunch, we got talking, and then Bob said, "How would you like to come over to DC? And what would you like to work on?" And so that's how it started. So, but it was very, it staggered me because, over the years, so many people I had known had fallen off the radar, and I, hadn't really kept in touch with Bob, and I didn't really, think that he would be calling me, so it was nice.
Well, none of us are surprised that he called you. You underplay all your accomplishments. Like I know there's a side of you that is kind of like, hey, I did do all this stuff. I mean, I wrote these huge, gigantic event books for Marvel. I made them a lot of money, but it's just me. Why would they call me? You're an interesting dichotomy. I think this is the character that you play. I feel like you undersell yourself in a way, you undervalue yourself. You're clearly a valuable commodity in comics, but every now and then, but you undersell that. But every now and then you'll say it, but you say it kind of ironically. Like, look at all
when I said that I would like to make the X-Men relevant again.
Yeah, like that's funny. I mean, but that's the truth. That's actually the truth. But that's not, I think, deep in your heart, like how you feel. Maybe. I mean, do you know how good you are? That's all I want you to. Do you understand how good you are for real, or?
I mean. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have done things, and I do. I'll say this. I think if I was unleashed and allowed to do what I do best, I think that I could have a dramatic impact on either DC or Marvel. I have expressed to Marvel many times, or DC many times, that I feel like a Porsche with a tarp over it on the lawn, up on blocks, and I think, let me do what I do, and we'll all be very, very happy. But it doesn't. I often feel I'm the only person that thinks that way.
What happens when you do what you do? Like, let's say that you were to write a horror movie with a tiny little budget.
Well, let me just say this. Like, for example, like a comic book company needs a flagship title, because once it has a flagship title, all the other books can slip into its wake, and as sales go higher, the other books will, a high tide rises all boats, as it were. I believe that DC currently does not have a flagship title. I think that I've had this conversation with people at DC that like Justice League is a book with 8 or 7 major characters, and so anything that happens in Justice League should be like that giant wake, with the battle cruiser moving forward. So any story that takes place should reverberate into Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, Flash, Green Lantern. And looking at those books editorially, if these individual books were responding to the flagship books, then you'd have this, momentum of this universe moving forward. but instead you have the Justice League telling its stories, and Flash telling its stories, and Batman telling its stories, and Superman telling his stories, and Wonder Woman telling their stories. And I think that if I had the opportunity to treat the Justice League like a flagship title, and maybe somebody else will do it. Maybe, there'll be another writer that will have that idea in their head and link up with an editor who believes in him. And that would be great. Do I think I could do it? Absolutely. Do I think that both companies need it at both companies? Absolutely. Do I believe there are a few people that can do it? Yes, I believe there are a few people that can do it. Do I believe I'm one of them? Yes, I do. But, to wake up and go to sleep thinking about, what I could do would be madness. Why would I do that? And, but it is in my head. So I don't know if that answers your question. Like, egotistically, do I believe that I can do that? Sure. Am I going to get that opportunity? No. So I won't even say probably not. I'd say no. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did in a way that I wasn't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And especially since I'm sort of underpinning my ideas about you with the fact that you've written a movie that's out right now in the theaters. I think it's still out. It came
No,
out.
it actually just closed this week after a 9-week run of $114.2 million.
With a budget of what?
4.8, I think it was.
That made some money.
Yeah, it was like 100 times its budget. So
talk about how that happened.
Well, think about like 100 times its budget, like whatever. What was? Well, okay, like say like Justice League of America. It cost $130 million to make.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if that made 100. Imagine if that made 100 times its budget. It's like
that would be nice.
That didn't happen. So
no, it didn't. Well, okay,
no.
So let's talk about the movie. What's it called?
It's called Happy Death Day. It's a story about a sorority girl that keeps getting brutally murdered and reliving the day, and each time she relives the day, she gets another opportunity to solve her murder.
When did you write this?
What's that?
When did you write it?
I wrote it about 10 years ago. So, and then it was about 2 weeks away from being made, and it had hotel rooms booked and flights booked, and then the company at the time pulled it, and then it went into turnaround, and then it was going to be direct to video, and then eventually it wound up at Blumhouse. So a little less than a year and a half ago, and suddenly it got made, and now it's an overnight success.
Wow.
10 years, an overnight success, 10 years in the making. So
what does that do for you? What is it like to have a movie? Well, I would imagine, by the way, the people that made the movie with you, the people who believed in the script and the screenplay, who made the movie, are all very pleased to know you.
I don't know. We don't really talk. So
are you getting any feedback?
They're probably pleased to know me from a distance, or they need to. They probably read my Wikipedia page every night before they go to bed. So,
it must be a tremendous thing. Now.
Yeah, certainly the response in Hollywood has been phenomenal, and I cannot wait for this holiday season to end so that I can start taking more meetings with people, because it happened October 13th, and it's funny because once a movie is a success, people are like, well, yeah, well, that's a successful movie. But the truth is you can see a screening of the movie on the 11th, and people love it and pat each other on the back and give each other hugs, and then on the 13th it's dead at the theaters, and that's the end of your project.
Mhm.
This had the complete opposite of that. This was a movie that we're all thinking, oh, I hope it does good. It's really fun. I hope people like it. And then boom, it exploded and people loved it. So, it was, so because of that, by the time people were responding to it, suddenly Thanksgiving was here and now Christmas is here and, Happy New Year is another week after that. So, so it's been hard to, but the movie comes out, starts streaming and is on Netflix and Redbox and stuff. I believe it's starts streaming on January 9th and then gets released on Blu-ray on January 19th.
Yeah.
So by the time I get back, it'll just be, I
Everyone
call it the
check
little
it out.
movie that could. What's that?
Everyone check it out. Everyone that's watching, Happy Death Day.
I'm sure if you looked at your scroll, you'd see that everybody but Ethan has seen this movie. So
I haven't seen it yet. I can't get to the movies. I have a baby at home. I didn't even get, I was lucky to
hey everybody. Is anybody hear Ethan's baby anywhere in the background? No. I haven't heard a peep. This is like super baby you're nursing over there.
So
I bet you if you push that Flash poster aside, the baby's just sitting there, little halo around his head,
crib being good,
covering up over the couch, picking his own blackberries.
See, you could do great things. You can make a movie. You can write a script for a movie that is so good and so enjoyable and so entertaining and so respectful of a producer's pocketbook, that you can turn a profit 100 times over. And from this, I'm quite sure that you are going to be given more work. People are going to be buying more of your screenplays, more movies of yours are going to be made, and it's going to make you feel very good inside.
Well, what is funny. I will say that when I said 25 years ago, people are still coming up and having me sign North Star. What I think is really fun is that, I mean, when did movies start getting made? Like in the early
1912.
Yeah, so that's when they started, doing movies, and so from 1912 to 2017, and then comic books really started at, I don't know, 19. When was the first Superman? Like, we'll say 1940s.
37.
What's that? 37?
7, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so since the time movies started and since the time comic books started, there's never been a comic book writer who sat down to an empty blank screen on a computer and started writing and got a movie made and the movie becomes a worldwide success. It's never happened. 25 years ago, will somebody else have done it? I don't know, maybe, but probably not.
At this point, yeah.
So that's fun. That I do have to say that's a exciting thing to have had happen. So even if I'm not the last, I was the first. So that was fun.
Scott, do you keep writing comics despite this, despite what you could be doing, because you love comic books so much?
Well, I don't think it's an either. I mean, it's not an either or. It'd be like if you had to choose between drawing comic books and your career as the Alex Jones of comics. You would, what would you choose? You don't have to choose. You can be both.
Not the Alex Jones. Good Lord. Oh, I got to think about that.
Who would you say you are?
They'd say I'm the Bob Ross of comics right now.
I know who that is.
Oh, he's the guy who does the happy little trees. He's the painter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's currently my thing. The politics are not fruitful in comics. I don't think that's actually healthy for the industry to discuss.
Oh, I didn't mean it from a political point of view. I just meant it from a growing audience kind of view.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, that would be nice. He's got a nice, healthy audience. All right, so basically, I'd like to turn it over now, if you don't mind. Will you answer some questions from these
Sure.
these good people in the audience. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the interview portion. All questions will be answered now. I will ask Scott whatever you ask me to ask him because I trust you guys to not ask him crazy questions. I really appreciate it. Diversity, inclusion, compassion, kindness in comics. That's a long screen name. Ask Scott, will you adopt him? He's nearly potty trained. Are you interested in adopting a man named Cecil?
How old is Cecil that he's just now being potty trained?
He says he's nearly potty trained.
Okay, nearly potty trained.
I'd say he's in his 30s. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I'll be honest. If he was like a cute little kid that I could like play ball with and, teach how to roller skate or something, probably, but 30 seems a little old.
Okay, so Cecil, the answer is no to that question. Scott will not
I'm
adopt
sorry,
it.
Cecil. I'm sorry, Cecil, but please keep up the potty training. Don't
get discouraged. Don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
Jeff Myers, thank you for that excellent super chat. Ethan, pitch Scott on a new horror script, The Blackberry Patch. Horror is sweet this season, art the rest of the year. How do you feel about that?
Revenge is sweet. Is that what he said?
No, he said horror is sweet this season, but it's tart the rest of the year.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent idea, and I will be stealing that idea from Ethan, and he won't see a dime. You keep all your tips, and I'll keep the money from Blackberry, the Blackberry horror.
It's going to make 100 times what. Fine, I'm not going to argue about it.
Oh my God, if I make a movie that only makes 100 times, what are you making tips?
That's
Whoa.
true.
Whoa.
Jake Meisling asked, not a question, just something I wanted to say. One of the best parts of Red Hood and the Outlaws is Artemis's interaction with Harley. How do you feel about that?
With who?
Harley.
Oh, Harley. Yeah, it was really fun. It was a fun, it was a really fun dynamic. I think that Artemis was speaking for a part of the audience that doesn't quite get Harley, and her popularity. And so for a character to be able to react in a way that wasn't as referential as Harley's often treated was a lot of fun. So
Al Bernardi, thank you for the super chat. Can you ask him about his changes to Tim Drake's origin? How much of that came from editorial, if any?
The thing is that when the New 52 started, there were changes made, like, for example, Superboy. Again, Grant took Superman and made him so that the first time he became Superman was when he moved to Metropolis. So that meant there was no pre-Superboy, which meant that everything that Jeff Lemire had written in the last year or so of the Superboy title didn't exist anymore, because Superboy couldn't have lived with Ma and Pa Kent, because Ma and Pa Kent had died 20 years ago in this new continuity. And so therefore, there was nothing that I could use from the previous version of Superboy in the New 52. So I had to make up a version of Superboy and a version of Kid Flash who couldn't have existed because Iris and Barry had never married, and all these other elements that went into creating this new world. And part of that meant that Tim Drake's origin story, as a result of this 5-year time span edict that was decided on, meant that there's a lot of his elements of the story that had to fall by the wayside. So it wasn't so much necessarily me, and it wasn't even necessarily editorial dictating to me. It was more that this was the world that was created, and I had to write stories within this world that was created. I couldn't, it couldn't be like, we're creating this world and Scott's writing something over here. So that is, it was, I would, there's certainly many things that I would like to blame, on editorial, over the course of my career, but that's not something that I would, in this particular case, Tim Drake's origin was, changes were necessitated by this new world that was created.
So shout out to artist Brian Denham, who was in the chat, and he wants to say, ask about his book Mixtionary.
That's true. I forgot I had a book. So what is it? Books, movies, TV, ice skating. I'm a really big ice skater. I made that up. I don't ice skate. Yeah, it was fun. It was, I actually think we should bring it back as an app, but I was told there's not money in those kind of apps. But essentially, for people that don't know, Mixtionary at the time was taking two words and mixing them together, like drainstorming. When you go to a board meeting and people just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and it just drains all the energy out of you. So instead of brainstorming, where you all get together and you have, these epiphanies and, challenges and, new ways to do something, and, and that's exciting. But too often corporate America finds themselves in these brainstorming meetings. So that was, it was like a bunch of words that we had mixed together, me and Christo and John Nee, and illustrated those stories. So, and I think it's still available if you go to Amazon and look it up. It's, I think.
Cool. Okay, so my daughter asks, this is from a question from Argos 4444. It says, my daughter asks, why a horror movie and not a superhero movie?
Well, everyone has to start somewhere.
Is that what you think? Is the horror movies kind of like an entry-level genre? I mean, traditionally horror movies have been thought of as low budget and then high return. I mean, that's, ask those directors of the 1950s with their low budget UFO movies and giant monster movies.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your thought? I mean,
yeah, but look at James Wan, who does Saw and then does Fast and Furious franchises. So, like I say, everybody starts somewhere. No, but I certainly will be doing a superhero movie in the very near future. So,
would you have liked to have taken a crack at Justice League?
No, that wouldn't have. I mean, if anything, I'd like to do something like The Creeper. I think you could do like a really cool, the same way that Fox took. Fox said, okay, we have this X-Men franchise. It's doing well. We put out a blockbuster every few years. Let's take a flyer on Deadpool and create something that hasn't been seen before in the comic book, in any comic book that I'm aware of, comic book movies. So hold on with that.
What about Man of the House?
I know. My mother is telling me that you haven't mentioned Man of the House, which you probably don't know about. Was a movie that I wrote about 10 years ago for Tommy Lee Jones. So where it was Tommy Lee Jones and the squad of cheerleaders, and the cheerleaders witnessed a murder, and Tommy Lee Jones had to move in with them to keep them safe. So that was action comedy, which was a $20 million budget. So no, $35 million. So,
have you had made?
It was made, yes.
How many movies? So just these two, or are there
these
more?
These are the two movies that I have had made. So,
what are you working on now with DC? Can you list everything and what's coming up?
Red Hood and the Outlaws.
Red Hood and the Outlaws. Do you have? Is there
something?
Done. Are you a dog person or a cat?
Oh, let me just say that was the thing. Is like I said, like to me, the idea is okay. They have this master plan for all the DC movies,
Yeah.
but I think the idea of taking a waiver on a creeper movie would be fun. That when I think of writing comic book franchises, I don't think about writing an X-Men movie. I think about writing a Marrow movie. Or if I think about writing a DC movie, I don't have any interest in writing, Flash or Cyborg.
Why?
Although I think I could, but I think what I find interesting is
I'm telling you, you undervalue yourself. That is.
Well, no, I don't think I don't. It's not that I don't think I couldn't do a good job. It's just not where my interest lies. So my interest lies in taking, like doing a creeper movie and making people go,
I like.
"Who the hell is a creeper? Who thought that was a good idea? Oh my God, it's amazing." That's what I would find interesting.
Wow. Okay. Who would you cast as the creeper? People are saying.
Oh, Ethan.
Me. That'd be my.
In fact, well, actually, like I'm not wearing my glasses now because I wanted to look handsome. So all I see is your face with this wild red hair behind it. So that's really in my head. That's what I've been thinking about this whole time.
Scott, I'll be honest with you. That this is the role that I've wanted my entire acting career.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the creeper for my entire life. I feel like I've earned it. So make it happen if you could, please.
Okay, I'm going to work on that. I'll work on my career and your career at the same time.
I'd appreciate it. I'd owe you a favor. I'd owe you a drink. Let's see. Are you a cat person or a dog person? Somebody wanted to know.
I'm a dog person.
Yeah.
In fact, hold on a second. I'm going to show you how much of a dog person I am.
Okay. Your questions are hilarious, guys. I'm dying. Where's your dog?
Okay, this is how much of a dog person I am. Huh?
Oh.
Look at that. Is this the cutest dog or what?
Wait, that's not a real dog?
Yes, it is.
I thought that was a real dog for a minute.
It is.
Oh my God.
Hey, are you a real dog?
Yeah.
Are you a real dog? Yes, you are.
That's good.
Yes, you are my real dog.
That's nice, Scott. That's good.
Yeah.
Go with the man.
Okay, you go on and play. Go play.
Listen, Dark Zitzamine says, "Hey Ethan, amazing interview. Thank you. Ask Scott what happened to that meeting of the Outlaws story he mentioned a couple of months ago."
The meeting of the that'll still happen. The idea was to take the new 52 version of the Outlaws with Jason, Artemis, and I'm sorry, Jason, Corey, and hold on a second. I got to close the door because I can hear us in the other room. Hold
on. They're all watching. His whole family's watching this on TV. So ask good questions. Now we're almost done anyway. We've only got 9 more minutes.
Oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So what happened was, yes, there's definitely going to be a story, and it's going to involve Red Hood, Arsenal, and Starfire meeting Red Hood, Bizarro, and Artemis. And they're going to have this huge mix-up of a story, and it'll be awesome.
That sounds like fun. Someone insistently is asking, a fellow named Sam Guthrie 1977 is saying, seriously, Ethan, ask him about that pic of him in Wizard Magazine forever ago. It was awesome.
That pic? I'm not sure. Maybe it's the one where I'm dangling from the ceiling in a multicolored Harlequin jacket. It was weird. I was doing a photo shoot, and they were like, they said, "Oh, can you do something different?" So I said, "Okay." So I hung from a pipe there with my feet. And I don't know why I did that, but it got in the, hey, what are you doing?
The dog might need to be walked.
Yeah, I told you to go. I'll walk in a little bit, okay? All right. See
Sam
you.
Guthrie also asks, why didn't he ever get Emma and Banshee together romantically in Generation X? He hinted at it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that I think flirting is really fun, and I think relationships really suck.
Oh,
So at least that's how what I've discovered in my life. So so that's what I bring to that's what I bring to writing comic books. Because none of the characters I write are ever going to be happily married, so or happily involved.
oh, this is interesting. You can decline to answer this if this is too controversial.
Uh-oh.
P says, EVS, ask him if he really has beef with Joel from Comic Book Cast. And he says, I think it's fake, question mark, question mark, question mark. You know what he's
I'm
talking
sorry,
about?
a beef with who?
Joel from Comic Book Cast.
I do not mean to offend Joel or Comic Cast, but I don't know
But who that
who that is. Or
that happens to me all
But
the
having
time.
said that, I mean, a lot of people, for some reason, my whole life have not liked me. So
I like
that goes to, comic books, real life, whatever. It's just, it would be great if everybody loved me because I'm so charming, but not everybody does. So if someone doesn't like me, that's okay.
I like you. I want you to
I like
know.
you too. I don't really need anybody to like me because I have my best friend right here.
A lot of people are asking, and this is serious. People are asking if your mom will get on camera and tell an embarrassing story about your childhood. Now, 3 people have asked for that. They want to meet your mother, and they want to hear the dirt about when you were a kid.
Well, talk to her directly, and you talk to her, Ethan, and you talk to her directly, and maybe she'll come and tell your story.
Yeah, Scott's mom,
Mrs. LOBDELL.
Mrs. LOBDELL. I like Scott's mom. I think that's funny.
I'll get a chair here. Hold on a second, in case she does decide to come out.
She might not. She might not.
She might not.
If you'd like to, Mrs. LOBDELL, if you'd like to tell a story that will humiliate your son to a large audience of people, they'd appreciate it. I'd appreciate it. It would be good for my YouTube channel. And
I will say I can't imagine any story that would actually humiliate me. I am so without shame.
let's
better
see.
or worst.
Let's leave the challenge up to her. And does she look like she wants to come out?
I don't know. You're a few seconds.
There's
a few seconds
delay. Yeah.
Delay. Yeah. So she's probably just getting this Ethan challenge right now.
Meanwhile, here's what people are saying: EVS and Scott are a better love story than Twilight. Scott is a nice dude. Mrs. LOBDELL, save yourself, run now. I want to hear about some adolescent hijinks. There is a guy dressed like Tom Brevoort with a wig who wants to know if you find him attractive. If you love EVS,
I find the wig attractive.
If you love EVS, you love your mom. That's right. This is all.
Oh, here she is. Here she is, ladies and gentlemen. Here, you take that seat so that you're not blurred by the lights.
Jesse, and thank you for the super chat. I like both you guys, EVS and Scott. Thank you. I'd like you to
throw that into your earpiece so that you have that.
Hi, Mrs. LOBDELL. Oh, can she hear me yet? Mm-mm.
Okay.
I can't hear.
He's not talking to you. Ethan, say
Hi,
something
Mrs.
so she can.
LOBDELL, how are you?
Hi, good.
So, what was Scott like as a boy?
Scott was a wonderful boy. The one story, though, that he told about the bicycle accident, that was kind of the worst thing that could have happened. I was not home at the time. Scott's one of 7 children, so they were all home. And when I got home from the store, my older sons were waiting for me, and they said, "Mom, don't get upset, but..." And I look over and see the bike smashed to smithereens.
Oh, no.
and don't see Scott or my daughter Jody. Now I go up on my bed and they're there bleeding and
Oh.
and I said, whatever possessed you to get on the bike with Scott? Scott couldn't even ride a tricycle, let alone a two-wheel bike with his sister on it. So that was kind of the worst thing that could happen.
And now I'm visiting her in Florida, and to this day, I can't drive her car, and I'm sure it's because of the bicycle accident. We never talked about it, but that's probably where that comes
I do
from.
let him ride the bike, though, when he's here.
Yeah, by myself.
But don't get on it with him. You
No, definitely
No.
not. I know better than that.
I just want to wish you guys Merry Christmas. The whole chat right now is going crazy saying Merry Christmas, LOBDELLs. Everyone is so happy to meet you. They're calling you Mama LOBDELL. And Merry
Mama LOBDELL, wow.
Yeah, and they're saying Mrs. LOBDELL oozes good mom. So they love you very much.
Very good.
You know, Ethan?
They're saying the look on Scott's face is priceless. This is just great. Thank you,
Ethan,
so much.
maybe you should think about a Mother's Day special episode of Comic Book Secret Pros.
And then just actually get everyone on with their mom. It's a really good idea.
Yeah, it started here, remember?
Yeah, it started here. Well, it was nice meeting you, Ethan.
It was great.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. This has been, I've kept you on for 2.5 hours now. This has been
Has it really been that long? Wow.
It didn't seem like it, right?
No, it went by like, okay.
That's a good thing. That's what we strive for. We want to make this fun and easy. And the chat has always pretty much remained the same amount of people in here, so that's good as well. They were entertained. Scott,
All right, well, Merry Christmas.
thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who joined. Thank you for the super chats. This chat will be posted and available to rewatch in about 30 minutes. Please hit like.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Please hit like, please retweet it, please share it, tell your friends about it. Obviously, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We want to bring you more content like this, and hitting like and subscribing helps us in the algorithm and really makes bringing on better and better guests possible for you. So thank you so much, Scott. You really were terrific, and we'll see you guys later. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.